to first just run through the Module 2 assignment. Had lots of awesome submissions so far. So well done to those that have already completed the assignment, and you should be able to see feedback as well as your grade already on the LMS. So well done to everyone that's done that. I did want to just bring up one design feature within this particular assignment. That wasn't a question or anything, and we weren't expecting you to pick this up, so don't feel too stressed if you didn't notice this, but it's very relevant to what we'll be discussing today. So this isn't my way, get rid of that. At this intersection here with Wellington Street, I'm just going to draw what the path of a cyclist traveling through here. So you can see along York Street, they'd be heading along that green section in the bicycle lane, and then heading straight forward and through the intersection to carry on like that. So that would be a cyclist's journey traveling through there. A motor vehicle would be driving alongside and would be approaching this intersection. Probably not the most accurate vehicle sizes there, but hopefully you get the gist. And because there's actually two left turn lanes, what you've got here, it's known as a dynamic visual obstruction. And it's a really fancy way of saying that the vehicle on the outside may have difficulty seeing a cyclist that's traveling through that intersection because of the vehicle on the inside. So this vehicle on the inside, they may be turning left at this intersection and then pause and give way because they can see a cyclist there. However, the vehicle on the outside also turning left, they have no idea that there's a cyclist there because the vehicle itself is obstructing that line of sight. So this is a really dangerous situation and would be one that you would hope would get picked up in a road safety audit or further design review stages, because this could be potentially be quite a significant concern for the overall design and safety of this project. So the reason we wanted to have a quick chat about this is because today's topic is all about intersections, and we will look at ways that you can make this a little bit safer for cyclists. So just wanted to throw that term out there, dynamic visual obstruction, if you are interested. But I'll hop straight into our PowerPoint presentation for today. And as I mentioned, we will be talking all about intersections. We've already hit the record button there. And our good friend Wally is back. So hopefully you'll remember that we need to have a look out for that sign there throughout the presentation and just keep a tally of how many times you see Wally. And this one is not included in the count. So you're currently at 0 Wallies. And I've got a question there. Sorry, is it dynamic visible obstruction or dynamic vehicle obstruction? Dynamic vision. Now I'm losing track. Dynamic visual obstruction.
Visual. Yeah, dynamic visual obstruction. A lot of people just call it masking.
Masking, yeah, it's probably a more common term, yeah.
Yeah, but the technical term is dynamic visual obstruction. Yeah, but keep your questions coming in the chat is all I wanted to say. I'm behind the scenes. Going away now. Bye.
Thanks, Ken. Before we actually hop into the intersections, we did get a suggestion from a participant, Cole, who actually shared a YouTube video in the last week's chat, which was all around this advisory bicycle lanes. And it was in a US video, I think it was the state of California. And this is another on-road bicycle infrastructure treatment. And it works differently to everything else that we've shown so far. So I did want to add in a few slides in case anyone was interested in this, because it is pretty cool and it's used extensively in Europe, not used much at all within our jurisdictions, but we're starting to see examples of it. So it may become more and more prominent. But what advisory bicycle lanes are is it basically rejigs the typical cross-section of, think local streets, local residential streets. So it's got a narrow carriageway and it provides exclusive bicycle lanes at all times for cyclists. which are referred to as these advisory lanes. So advisory lane, and you can see on the plan view as well. And you'll notice that the actual traffic lane width, although it allows for movements in both directions, it's not wide enough to actually enable those passing vehicles to move at the same time. So one actually needs to move over into the bicycle lane to be able to safely pass one another, which may sound a little bit crazy. Like, why are you trying to encourage motor vehicles into the bicycle lane? But the important thing to clarify here is this is only an appropriate treatment where it's low traffic volumes. That's what I was trying to say. You're thinking local streets, residential. It doesn't have any throughput characteristic. That's not the intent of this particular function of road. It's all about just, providing local access to residents. We've got this example here. This one is in Canada of this being used. So you can see that the actual traffic lane width, it's a little bit wider than a traditional traffic lane, but it's still not wide enough for an oncoming vehicle to, pass one another. So they would need to creep into the bicycle lane and go off like this. And the benefit of this is that the cyclists are never actually, they're not the ones that need to veer off and, give way to oncoming vehicles or anything. They've got the bicycle lane the whole way through. So their movement isn't actually impeded by this particular treatment. And I'll show you, there's within the video that Cole shared as well, they tend to use these signs within the US and Canada. We wouldn't typically use something that says yield, but we'd use something similar just to make drivers aware of what's actually happening within this road environment. We do have an example of this in Victoria. This only got installed in August last year, so it's still new. So there was a little bit of marketing around it and, video showing exactly how this should be used and things like that. But it was already a very popular cyclist local street to be riding on. So they've kind of worked out, well, this is somewhere where we want to provide an extra emphasis on cyclist safety. So they've rejigged the cross section and got rid of old line marking and instead provided these advisory bicycle lanes. And if it wasn't clear before, I've just done some snips here to show you exactly how oncoming vehicles would pass each other and how cyclists are not impeded by this movement. So you can see in the bottom there, we've got a motorist that's heading up towards the top of the screen, and there'd be a motorist coming down the bottom, and cyclists are within their bicycle lane. Once you spot an oncoming vehicle, you'd be looking out behind you and to the left of you to see if there are any cyclists within the bicycle lane. And if it's not and it's safe to do so, you are able to enter the bicycle lane as a motorist. And then that does enable you to pass the opposing traffic direction and also maintains the cyclist flow. And for lots of traffic engineers out there that haven't seen this, this might be a pretty crazy concept that you're, forcing motorists to slow and prop and give way. But if you think to narrow, constrained environments where you've got parking, on-street parking, both sides of the carriageway, and there's already only one traffic lane that permits both movements of traffic. Already in those environments, motorists are used to having to pick a little gap in the parked lane and to prop and wait there and store and give way to oncoming traffic and then go on forward. So this is just kind of expanding on that idea, but implementing a permanent bicycle lane on either side there. So it's a new technique, but yeah. Ken.
As it did chat a good point. If you go back to slides to the picture of the lane, another one.
This one here.
Yeah, the parking buffer zone little indents. They're interesting, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, the line marked ones there just at the parking.
I've got to say, I don't think I've really seen that in Australia and New Zealand. We would probably just, extend this all the way along and keep that a consistent buffer. But I think it achieves the same goal. It's just showing that that's where the risk is, and that's where you don't want to be riding near.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Pick up.
Great bigger prize there, I think, for that. And where is it implemented in Victoria, or where is it?
Oh, yeah, it's called Napier Street, Napieer Street in Fitzroy. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's only installed late last year. It was run as a bit of a trial of sorts. And I think the good news is we haven't had any massive bike lash, which is the term used if you've got lots of significant kickback from the community. So there hasn't been a lot of media about this being a negative thing. So it means it's probably working. But yeah, I think there was lots of, community consultation with this project, which would have helped a lot because it is a relatively new concept, but one to check out. And I just got a photo as well of how this actually looks in Melbourne. So you can see how that all works there. That's where the vehicles go. You can also see, like, this is a local area. You can't even see any vehicles in either of these photos using the through movement, so it's low traffic as well, which is where this is appropriate. Anywho, let's hop into our intersections conversation today. So, well, actually, before we move on to that, we'll just have a quick chat about the 360-degree video footage for the two different on-road facilities. So would love to just hear any feedback from how people experienced it, if you managed to get the VR 360-degree footage working. The two examples, so the first one was a protected bicycle lane, and the second one was riding adjacent the dooring zone and also adjacent the live traffic lane there. Did anyone want to share any insights, how they felt other example, or it maybe gave you a better perspective why we keep saying the protected bicycle lanes are the gold standard and just the level of safety they offer? For anyone to pop in any thoughts?
Nobody popping in anything at this stage, Max.
Good.
We'll have to make a poll up for this one. Oh, there's a few there. Scary riding in the door zone.
Yeah, definitely. And if you haven't actually, done it yourself on the bicycle, it's probably a good example to be able to feel it from that perspective without being in harm's way, because you can just be on the couch or wherever. But yeah, it's just such a big difference from the cyclist perspective, being in those two different environments. It's so much nicer, so much more comfortable riding in a protected bicycle lane.
Well, example one is better. A car seems to almost crash into you guys when riding across the road.
Yeah, beautiful. Great pick up there, Cheston. So I actually might draw that out. Oops, went ahead. Because that is very pertinent to what we'll be discussing today. But you can kind of see that vehicle there is turning left, and as cyclists, we were traveling through in that instance. And due to the parked vehicle here, once again, you've got that visual obstruction. So you've got something in the way that makes it difficult for us as cyclists to see a left-turning vehicle, and for a left-turning vehicle to see us as cyclists. So that's another thing that we will discuss as we go through today's content and dealing with these facilities as they approach intersections. But yeah, that's bang on. Okay. Oh, and I just read that Cheston works near there. So certainly a lovely place to be riding. So, but thankfully no crashes that you're aware of there. Okay. That's good to hear. I will just hop into the topic now of intersections, and a lot of the content from today's module will be out of this report here, which is called appropriately don't give up at the intersection. And so this is from North America, and it's an excellent paper. Lots of the figures and, the way that they reference things is slightly different to how we would word it. So I'll just run through what they mean by those terms. And, at a high level, the principles are still the same. And so we can take all of that thinking and apply it to our local networks. But it's awesome reference, and it's free to download, and it should be included, or it is included on our LMS. So you can download it off there, or in the pack that we sent you, it should be on the USB. So awesome reference.
I'm not sure we do USBs anymore, Max.
There you go. Well, you'll find it on the LMS then. Sorry about that, Ken.
That's all right.
We'll get started with today's module, which will be talking about protected intersections. And this is a really new concept within our jurisdiction. So if you haven't heard that term before, there's no stress. We'll go through it from the foundation and exactly what the principles of a protected intersection are. We're going to look at the design, exactly how to facilitate a protected intersection design. Look at lots of examples. It's a lot easier to picture them when you've actually got, installed examples. And there's also one that's been installed in Melbourne. So we'll have a look at that and talk about how that kind of came to fruition. It wasn't an easy process, but we did get there in the end. We'll also discuss more conventional intersections and signalized intersections, and talk about things like head starts, left turn and through treatments, hook turns and bicycle signals. So quite a bit to go through in today's session. And intersections are regularly kind of the sore point for cyclists, and where lots of the trauma does occur for the cycling community. And that can be due to a range of issues. It can be, the obstruction issues, actually being able to see motorists that are turning left, for instance. It could be red light runners that, drive through an intersection. It could be a vehicle that's entering an intersection and then just fails to see a cyclist as they're riding through, because, we're kind of trained to look left and right and look out for motor vehicles, much bigger vehicles, and kind of oversee the fact that there's cyclists there. So there's lots of reasons that there is a higher proportion of accidents occurring at intersections, and we'll talk about how to mitigate those. Here is an artistic impression of what a protected intersection looks like. And the thing that you may note immediately is on each quadrant or corner of the intersection, there's these weird little kind of boomerangs or kidney-shaped, jelly bean-shaped islands, and they have a very, very distinct purpose. So what you'll notice, the design intent of these is to make sure that motorists are not cutting over the corner and into the cycling space to undertake a left turning movement. Instead, they're going to be going around it and turning left, and that will bring them almost perpendicular when they cross over the bicycle path. So that's a really, really important thing to notice, and it will be much clearer as we go through examples exactly why that is so important, because it's increasing the distance or the offset that you've got from the bicycle lane and where the traffic lane is. The next figure will explain that a little bit better. So in a conventional intersection that we've shown here on the left-hand side, traditionally, cyclists would be placed right up, hard up against the traffic lane, or the left-hand turn lane. And what that means is when you do have a left-turning vehicle, you've got this awkward angle that they're crossing over at. So it's kind of like an angle like this. It's acute. And if you could imagine if you were in the driver's seat turning left, to be able to see a cyclist that's at the back left of the vehicle, it's very difficult because it wouldn't be within the wing mirror It wouldn't be in the rear view mirror. It would be a head check to the back left, which could also be within the blind spot of the vehicle. So this kind of red shaded area here, that's indicative of where the driver's attention is. And as you can see, the cyclist is not within the driver's attention sphere. So that's a bit of a concern, because we want to make sure if there is a conflict, we'll make sure speeds are low, and we want to make sure that there is adequate sight lines between both users, so they know exactly, you know, who needs to give way and who's what speeds they're going, and, you know, just in order to minimize the risk of any collision occurring there. And the critical thing that changes a conventional intersection to a protected is you'll see that this offset is greatly increased. And the offset, that refers to the general traffic lane to the bicycle lane. So an offset is just a fancy way of saying the distance or the width, the space in between the bicycle lane and the general traffic lane. That's really, really critical. If we can make that wider, push that out further, then what we have is, instead of the vehicle crossing over at an acute angle, you're getting closer and closer to something that's more perpendicular. And as you can see, the line of sight for the driver, that sphere that we showed before in the red, that is now much more central to where the cyclist is crossing. So a motorist is no longer forced to do a head check and look at the back left where it could be a blind spot. Instead, the cyclist is crossing straight in front of them within the windshield. Much easier to spot. So it's got a significant benefit, the protected intersection design, in increasing the visibility for motorists that are turning left into the minor leg or the other leg to spot oncoming cyclists. Here's another example of a planned view of a conventional intersection. So you can see there is our general traffic lane, and our bicycle lane is right next to it. There's very, very little offset there. In this example, it does look like there's a little separator, but I wouldn't even say that's conventional. It's usually there's nothing there, just line marking, just a bit of paint. But you can imagine, you know, this illustrates the point before. If we had the cyclist traveling through and that vehicle turning left there, really, really acute angle, really tight angle, makes it difficult for the motorist to see the through traffic for the cycling. Compare that to the protected intersection, and we have a greater offset between the traffic lane and where the cyclists are actually crossing over here. So the greater you can increase that offset, the more opportunity you're giving to motorists that are turning left to be able to spot cyclists that are crossing there. It's a really important point to convey in this design. That's probably one of the key principles. Another example, left-hand side, we've got the conventional intersection, and this one's also a skewed intersection, so that also makes things even more difficult for a left-turning vehicle. So they'd be taking that movement there with a cyclist heading straight through, and we can compare that to a protected intersection where we've got far more room and the cyclist heading there. So you can see that one is actually they're crossing nearly perpendicular, which is a far better outcome. We'll go through the design features of a protected intersection, and this one is taken from that, taken from MassDOT, which is also an American Massachusetts Department of Transport. Fantastic resource as well. So we've got this one included on LMS for you to download and keep forever. But this kind of just highlights what you need to be looking at, things that you need to consider if you were to be designing these with any of your networks, you know, and this could be retrofitted. Things that we kind of consider key elements of a protected intersection. So number one here is a corner refuge island, which you can see there. Sometimes we call them separation islands. As the jelly bean term, they've also been called that, you know, kind of colloquially. But they ensure that the motorist isn't just tracking over the bicycle space. So without that, a motorist would be very likely just to kind of do this, which would negate the effectiveness of the protected intersection, because you've basically got the motorist then traveling at higher speeds and also much more encroached in the cyclist space. So the corner refuge island is critical in the design, and getting that right is really important. The scene number two, in this particular guidance document, they call it a forward bicycle queuing area, which is just where cyclists would store. So that's where they pause and wait for the lights to turn green. And, you know, things to consider within that space is the size of the storage area. So you've got to make sure that you're not, you know, doing such a narrow space that only one cyclist can store there, and then you're going to have lots of queuing issues, and that means cyclists coming this way won't be able to travel through there because there's, you know, just a influx of cyclists just waiting there to cross. So you can look at, I mean, that's just one thing you'd need to consider as part of this design. Just got a question there from Walter asking, yeah, do waste trucks track over the islands? And I will cover those shortly. Thank you, Ken. You read my mind. Number three, the motorist yield zone. So that is just where the motorist is turning into the side street, and exactly how that is conveyed. We typically wouldn't use this type of line marking or pavement marking, but it's just indicative to show exactly how that would be managed. It's important to note that it's also separated from the pedestrian zone. So there's a pedestrian place to cross, there's a cyclist place to cross. I think that's a really good decision. Separate the two users at the intersection. That's a good point. Number four, the pedestrian crossing island. So that's just this location here. So you can also bring it back to where the footpath is here, but they've shown it here because there's happens to be a median somewhere to store in this instance. May not be always appropriate in every site that you're looking at, but something to also consider. Another really important one that I like to mention is this number 5, the pedestrian crossing of the separated bike lane. And you'll also see it on that peg there, number 5. And the reason I think this is really, really important is because if you just have constant, like if that was all just the bicycle lane, or if that was all perceived just to be the bicycle lane, what you would have is just cyclists going at high speed. They'll get a green light and that's all they'll think about. Okay, I can get through this intersection. And then fail to really recognize that pedestrians are also, you know, crossing over here, and they've also waited their turn to cross over safely, and they've also waited for that green light. So what they've done here is they're actually recommending to install zebra crossings. So they're actually saying, hey, even though you've got a green light at these locations, pedestrians have priority over you as a cyclist. And I think that's a really sensible solution. I think it's good to ensure one way or another, one of the users knows who is going to be giving way to who. And a lot of the time that's easier to convey to cyclists. You need to slow and give way to pedestrians at this location. If you're in a really, really pedestrianized environment, maybe one side of the intersection connects to a train station, the others to a museum or something like that, that's a really, you know, important location for pedestrians to be able to safely cross over those intersections, because it's going to be a very, very common movement. And that just highlights exactly why you need cyclists to be slowing down in that space, expecting to see pedestrians there and giving way to them. Another really good thing you could do is if you raised that feature up. So you just made that as footpath level. It would just make pedestrians crossing even safer because that would physically slow cyclists down. I've just got a question in there from Sam. What would you use for yield zone? MR Main Roads Western Australia have previously told me that don't support line marking or coloured paint through junction as it may confuse motorists. Yes, lots of different jurisdictions do have different ways of doing it. So I can't quite speak for every jurisdictions. I would tend to agree that these, sorry to kind of detract, but it will come up in a few slides time, but these kind of little triangles, they're used pretty often in Europe and America. They're called shark's teeth, and it's basically just what we would use for giveaway line marking. Within Victoria, for signalised crossings, we use dotted lines like this. Coloured paint through junctions, yes, and I wouldn't say it's overly common. Back in the day, they were used, I would say, quite often near schools and things like that as a means to raise the prevalence of or the importance of those particular crossing points. But every jurisdiction has their own way of actually demarcating those zones. So I just recommend checking in with whichever jurisdiction you're in and seeing if they've got any technical notes within that section, because it's not quite standardized. Good question though. Ken, did you have anything to add in that space?
I was just going to say Cole's put in a nice link to the street view in Vancouver there of a protected intersection. Almost identical to the one you've got there on screen.
There we go. Thank you, Cole. Now we'll have a look at some international examples. That's a great segue. Thank you, Cole. And we've got this one, of course, which is from the Netherlands, as you may have guessed by the water body and the colours. But what we'll focus on in this particular example is we'll just look at this top right quadrant of the intersection. And we'll do just a brief analysis of what the cycling environment is like. So this is what it was prior to the construction of a protected intersection. And the next slide will be a protected intersection. So this is the before. So we'll pretend that we're on our bicycles and we want to travel straight through this intersection, and we're traveling up from the top of the page. So we want to do something like this. And adjacent us, you can see there's no real separation at all. Like you're right next to the traffic lane, you're right adjacent the curb. So it's just a very small space to be riding in, but adjacent would be a vehicle wanting to turn left like this. Slightly stuffed up that arrow. But anyway, you get the gist. Hopefully that makes it a little bit clear what I was discussing there about how that acute angle between those two different paths makes it very, very difficult for that left turning vehicle to be able to spot the oncoming cyclists. In other words, if you were that cyclist and you saw that there was a vehicle kind of coming up behind you, and you'd hope it wasn't turning left because you're already potentially within its blind spot. If it was slightly ahead of you, you're probably already in its blind spot. And if you see the left blinkers go on, then you need to make, a snap decision. Am I going to, pedal faster and hope that the vehicle has recognized me prior to coming up to this intersection? Or am I going to slam on my brakes and assume that they're going to turn left in front of me without, giving way? And there is a road rule, that states if a cyclist does note the blinker goes on left, then they're not allowed to actually head straight through. They need to give way to vehicles, but a lot of the time that can be, very difficult to judge in practice. And it is a millisecond kind of decision that you'd need to make, whether I go straight through or whether I slam on the brakes and, just trying to evade any type of collision. So this is what it was like beforehand. So we've got that really tight acute angle, difficult for the motorist to see us as a cyclist. Here's how things looked after they decided to make this a protected intersection. I'll use the same colors. So once again, cyclist, we get carried kind of off-road almost, and through this intersection, and then through here to an off-road facility. So you can see we're using much more of the footpath in this instance, in that particular quadrant, and getting taken away from the intersection before crossing over. I'll do the same diagram here of a left turning vehicle in this space. Wow. And do that little collision point. So where that conflict does exist, that angle there is perpendicular, implying that if the cyclist would actually be within the windshield. So it's right in front of the driver's viewpoint. So it's so much easier to be able to spot. So just by making that slight design tweak of offsetting the bike lane, you've really maximized this sight distance, as best as you can within this space, and made it a lot safer. I'm going to show you some photos now of how this actually looks on the ground, because it is interesting, and you probably saw, okay, that's what the refuge little splitter island things that Max was talking about before, that's what they look like. Well, here's what they actually look like on the ground. They're flush, which is a little bit strange. This is not the way that I'd really recommend doing it. I actually might go to the next photo. You can see this is all just the same level. It's the same level as the footpath, same level as the carriageway. Really strange. This can work in the Netherlands because they have such a bicycle culture, and they're so aware at every intersection. And every time they cross any kind of road, they know that there's going to be a bicycle there, and they know running adjacent the road, there'll probably be a bike path. So it's just injected into their culture that there's going to be bicycles there. So they're already probably driving slower and more aware to look out for vulnerable road users. I think if we introduce something like this within our jurisdictions, what you'd see is vehicles just tracking straight over that, because there's no definition there really, that is meant to be a separate facility or meant to protect cyclists. And so it probably wouldn't work quite as well here, but that's all the beauty of living in such a cyclist central area. You can kind of get away with things like this, but not one that we would recommend here. Here's something that might look a little bit more familiar. This one is in Maryland in the States. Once again, you can see these corner refuge islands, splitters. And another interesting point to note, which wasn't shown in the previous one, but you can see that there's like a gray stamped out version or hatched area, and then there's the skinnier red detail as well. And these are actually at two different levels. And the important thing, or the reason that this is the case, is for the tracking of heavy vehicles, which will become a very important design consideration for those that have ever worked in intersection design, particularly signalized intersections, and trying to look at all the different, heavy vehicle movements and looking at their swept paths and managing all of those different movements and trying to rejig where the different pedestals go and making sure there's no obstructions. It is a process that is iterative and making sure that you're getting the best outcome possible. But the importance of it is general traffic, they can swing around and basically not encroach on that area whatsoever. However, heavier vehicles or long vehicles, they have a much larger swing, and their swept path will bring them onto that area there. However, it won't take them all the way across and into the bicycle facility. So there still is a raised section where that's meant to be the demarcation. So you've kind of got two levels. It's referred to as a concrete apron for those that are familiar with that. So the one that's in the grey there, that would be the concrete apron, and then the curb and channel is raised up, and that's closer to each of the quadrants there. I'll show you how that looks in case that wasn't quite clear. But you can see here, this would be our island there, and you can see adjacent, it just juts out a little bit and goes around. That's the apron. So that's kind of how that management of heavier vehicles or long vehicles is managed. You've got those two tiers. So hopefully just general traffic are using the concrete apron and they're not tracking over that, but yeah, it still may occur. And the other interesting point about this particular design, I might flick back to the previous slide. So you may have noticed, and also in that slide, that the top half of the intersection is bidirectional. All the other sides of the intersection is just one way, but the top side, for whatever reason, perhaps there's extra demand to be accessing both sides there, that's bidirectional, and all the other sides is just one way in a clockwise fashion. Ken?
Is there any advice on the minimum road width required for these intersections? There's a bit of space there.
So if you're looking in a retrofit kind of scenario, you would be looking at taking up one of your existing stand-up lanes. So in other words, you're looking at intersections with multiple stand-up lanes. So it could already be, a through and a left and then a through and a right. Maybe you have to take the through and the left and it becomes through left, right, like shown in there. So yes, the odds are to create the separation, that offset that is required, unless you have an abundance of adjacent footpath space, which you may not have depending on your sites, you're probably taking up a stand-up lane. So yeah, in terms of minimum road widths, you could just look at calculating, traditional traffic lane widths and going from there. But yeah, good question. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that you can see that this part here is bidirectional. Going to show you another example. This one's probably a lot more common, familiar to what we would expect in terms of road design, because it's just traditional green pavement and, nice, similar shapes to what we would have within our jurisdictions. This one is in Manchester in the UK, and it's called the Cyclops Junction, which sounds pretty cool. It's got an acronym. It's Cycle Optimized Protected Signals. So there you go. That's one to look up if you're interested. And there's a few things I like about this one. So you can see once again, those are those islands that we've got on each of the quadrants. And they've also got enough space there for the pedestrians to pause and wait there. A cool thing about this particular design and what they've done as a deliberate intent is, in the previous examples, if you were turning right as a cyclist, you're actually encouraged to go kind of all the way around in this type of fashion. And what that means is you would actually kind of pause here, wait for the light to go green, and pause at that leg, wait for the light to go green, and then you can travel through heading right. What they've done in this example, and I'll draw it in a different color, is they've got this huge bicycle box, right at the intersection. So they're saying, hey, if you don't want to have to take that, extra, 10, 20, 30 meters to go around the intersection to turn right, you can, if you feel comfortable, prop in the right turn lane as a vehicle would prop in a right turn lane, and pick a gap in the traffic and then turn right when it's safe to do so. So it's not discounting that, there's also commuter cyclists, there's cyclists that are very confident riding in these intersections. If that's what you want to do, then we'll also provide you the opportunity and somewhat encourage you. If that's what you want to do, then you can do that. I think it's a pretty clever way of doing it, because realistically, if you didn't have this massive box there at the start, showing that this is also for cyclists, cyclists would still be going through there and taking that option to turn right anyway. So regardless, as if you demarcated it and encouraged it, it'd be happening anyway, because cyclists will, probably do pick the movement that suits their skill level or what they feel comfortable doing. And that's the end of it. So yeah, I thought this is a pretty cool example. And I'll show you how this looks down on the ground as well. So you can see this one is like a panoramic of how this whole intersection looks like. It's a lot more colorful than the previous examples. Yeah, and the red that they use to display for the pedestrian crossing. Here's actually what I was talking about before. I might just hop to the next slide. But you can see as a pedestrian crossing over there, you might be a little bit hesitant because you're not sure, is the cyclist going to give way to me as I cross over to access my push buttons? Or am I meant to give way to the cyclist? I'm not really sure. So that's what I was saying before. It's a really good idea. Like if we demarcate that as a zebra crossing, then let's give pedestrians the priority to access those crossing points and just make it really clear which user has the priority in those instances. Probably enough examples about international. I might hop into one more local. So this is in Melbourne, Melbourne's protected intersection. This is the existing, sorry, this is before any treatment that occurred, so how things looked. Once again, I'll just focus on one quadrant because it's a bit difficult to kind of look at all aspects of the design, kind of all in one go. So we'll just look at the bottom right-hand corner of this intersection. And you can see there's 1, 2, 3 stand-up lanes. So there's a left lane, there's 2 through, or it's a through and then a through and right from memory. And that was exactly how this intersection was set up. On the approach, a little bit difficult to appreciate, but that is actually a separated bicycle lane. So you can see the parking is away from the curb and channel there, and the bicycle lane is kind of on the inside there. So they already had a separated bicycle lane on approach to this intersection. But previously what it was, oh, well, things are a little bit too hard and I don't know what to do at this intersection. So they just gave up and they didn't do anything to, encourage cyclists to get through that intersection safely, which is a really, really common way to deal with things. If there are any bicycle lanes, they tend to just end before the intersection. Super, super common to see that. Well, we'll have a look at how things changed over the years. So once a protected intersection was installed, this is, we can see a before on the left hand and the after on the right hand side. One of the things to note, as I mentioned before, one of the stand-up lanes did have to get eaten up by the bicycle lane there. So there was, some degree of compromise between, the existing traffic lanes and also the bicycle lane. But what that means is that separated bicycle lane continues all the way up. Sometimes my pen just goes crazy like that for some reason. So the bicycle lane got to continue all the way up to the intersection, meaning that you've got separation all the way now, which is just such a big win already. Just that one design, change. Instead of having that conflict point there and you want, your cyclists just heading towards the intersection, there's no facility there at all for them. And then a left turning traffic heading in front of them, just a really ugly scenario. You've provided full separation all the way up to the intersection. Awesome to see. And the same was obviously mirrored on the other side of the intersection, but that's Melbourne's protected intersection. Albert Street and Lansdowne Street for those interested, but we'll go into some design details to get really into a bit more intricate principles so you've got an idea. This was how things looked like on plan. And as you could imagine, this was the first that we had in Melbourne and still is the first that we have in Melbourne. So it's took a lot of collaboration, a lot of cooperation from different stakeholders because, jurisdictions are not particularly excited by new trials if they interrupt things like parking or if they interrupt things like traffic lanes. They're always worried about congestion and things like that. But this was noted as a route that was incredibly important for cyclist connectivity. It was a main commuter route into the CBD, and this particular intersection was one where lots of the cycling community saw, this was the weak chain in the link, because you had separated facilities beforehand and afterwards, but in this intersection where there's lots more traffic, this is where we're just left to fend for ourselves. So in order to have this conversation, well, what can we do to make sure that this design gets everyone happy and on board? Well, first thing we'll have a look at is our heavy vehicles. Can we still, get all the swept paths and turn requirements for all of our heavy vehicles and buses that do run along here and take left and right turns? So this was an iterative process. The first phase of it was just a tiny little refuge that you can see there. And the general consensus was, okay, this might offer some degree of protection for cyclists, but there's also a pretty significant risk that motorists won't even see that. And they're just going to drive straight over that little dot on the road. I mean, it will be raised, there'll be a curb, but will they actually see that, particularly in low light conditions or it's raining? Is it going to become a tripping hazard? So they went back to the drawing board and they thought, no, we'll make it a little bit bigger then. We'll size this up. We had a look at that one and thought, well, hang on, well, this one's got some weird little kinks in it as well. That's not really how swept paths work. We like to see, like a normal radius curve on things. So one fluid motion. So now we're getting more to a shape like this one here. And that one seemed good, but there was a little bit of concern about that storage effect that I was talking about before for cyclists. Well, if we're making this too bulky, are there just going to be lots and lots of cyclists storing and waiting to cross over the intersection and then blocking other cyclists or other pedestrians trying to access? So that's when design number 4 came up, this nice skinny kind of boomerang idea, which is trying to treat that storage issue. The final solution was this one here, which is kind of a blend of everything that you've seen before, but it's also got those mountable areas there, which I spoke about in the US example, which is where it does allow for heavy vehicles, long vehicles to track over those areas, to mount the curb and safely turn without, unnecessarily hitting curb and potentially damaging their vehicles. Ken.
Hey, Max, just a question came in there around the deviation I suppose cyclists need to make off their line. Did you want to comment on that?
No, that's spot on. That's a valid point. Actually, it might be easy to show on the next slide that I've got here. So the concern there that Cole is raising is, if I'm a cyclist traveling at speed and I've got a green light, so I don't need to worry about pausing and waiting there, I'm used to just traveling straight through. Instead, I'm now being forced to go kind of around and take this deviation route like this, that kind of banana shape. That was a concern raised by a community and from bicycle groups and things like that. What you may have noticed by this particular slide is, well, rather than just assume what things are like out on paper, let's build a 1-to-1 scale of this exact intersection in an off-road, protected environment where we can control everything, and let's get out and actually ride it. So that's exactly what they did. So this was the City of Melbourne and Vic Roads, the Department of Transport, other cycling groups, all got together, got on their bikes. They got a test vehicle out there as well that was just driving and doing different movements, turning left, turning right. All the cyclists as well, they got to experience what it felt like doing all those movements, and particularly that movement there that Cole brought up regarding that deviation in the path. if you are, a very fast cyclist and, commuting is your intent or training is your intent, then that deviation could become an issue. And there has actually been instances where cyclists have failed to see, that little island there and have gone straight into it and fallen off their bicycle. So yes, that is a concern. However, you're looking at a whole raft of different cycling levels using this particular intersection. Lots of cyclists are doing this, just as a means to get to work, to go and visit friends, go and visit the shops, get the groceries, things like that. And to have this deviation is almost inconsequential. Lots of cyclists wouldn't even recognize that that was something that they had to give up, or, not as a significant an issue. So there's some people that sit on one side of the fence to say that that's, no, you can't do that at all, because that just greatly limits my ability to travel at 35, 40 kilometers per hour everywhere. And another side of the fence to say this greatly improves the safety. And, we're now attracting a different range of cyclists. And so yeah, it is a little bit open to interpretation, subjectivity. Some people still hate this intersection, I should also add. But from a safety point of view, which is what we're kind of spruiking, the safety benefits of this intersection are still significant. And it just all due to that sight lines that we've, I've probably talked enough about so far, but it's just such a big improvement once you feel so much safer heading through there. Here we go. This is how things look like from a plan view. So this vehicle here, hopefully it's a lot easier to see. That's their line of sight right in front of them as cyclists are crossing over, and pedestrians. Just looking at the time, I've got a fair bit to get through, so I got a bit too passionate about the protected intersections, but I've got a question there from Sam. Can those 30-kilometre cyclists join the traffic lane, or are they stuck in the lane because of separators? Good question, really good question. So I might draw that one out as well. And you can see in this particular leg on the left-hand side of the screen, because of the separation or that offset there, they are strongly being encouraged to take the protected intersection. That's not to say that every single cyclist is doing that, and not to say that some cyclists aren't heading out into traffic and doing that. It does occur. I don't think we've actually seen a trial of, what percentage of cyclists are using it as a protected intersection and which are heading around. But yeah,
it's pretty hard on that one, because sort of you lead in as you separate it anyway because of.
That's true.
Yeah.
This leg may be a little bit easier to head straight out into the intersection and cross there. But yeah, it does happen. And cyclists will kind of gauge their own level of risk. And if they, they have a quick look back and they know there's no traffic going in there and that's the path they want to take, then yeah, it's rarely a perfect world where you're going to meet everyone's needs.
All right, half an hour to go.
No, I'm ready. I've got this intersection now from a ground level, and it just perfectly illustrates all the points, and then I promise we'll move on from protected intersections. But here we are as a cyclist, and on the on the right-hand side, there is a taxi turning left. And this arrow here is the traditional way a cyclist would travel through the intersection. And this arrow here is obviously the taxi's left turn. Go forward in a moment in time. So this is half a second later, maybe less. So perhaps that's clearer what those little islands meant, but that yellow line is what conventionally a cyclist would be forced to take. That would be their path. If you saw that taxi at this instance, that's when you need to make a decision. Okay, does the taxi know I'm here? Are they going to give way to me? Do I just brake and assume that they're going to just turn left without acknowledging me? That's their movement. And this purple arrow is now what we have thanks to the protected intersection. Step forward another half second in time. You can see that yellow arrow is where we would have been traditionally right next to the bumper of that vehicle, very, very close to it. And that is obviously the left turn path, and the purple arrow is where we are. So we're much further away from the vehicle, but most critically, if you look within the window of the taxi, you can see that the gentleman's line of vision is aimed directly at us as a cyclist crossing. So that's excellent because they can see us and we feel comfortable cycling across there and continuing our journey. They've slowed and given way. Okay, this applies to all intersections as well as minor legs here, but this idea of a recognition zone, I actually might skip over this one and go into the New Zealand one instead, because I think this explains it a little bit better. But it's basically all about ensuring that there's appropriate line of sight for both vehicles to see cyclists and cyclists to see vehicles. So that example at the start where we showed the parked vehicle was really, really close to the intersection, made it really difficult for the cyclist to see the left-turning vehicle and vice versa. So having this approach clear space, as it's called, or just ensuring that there's adequate lines of sight is crucial in all of our designs. So move on now. Let's go to signalized intersections, and I'll get some engagement from everyone. It's that time of day where we ask, what is wrong with this photo? So I might get rid of that cyclist there, and I'll tell you what, I'll just move that banner down there for you so you've got a clearer look. But any suggestions? What's going on here? Can anyone work out what's happening? What's wrong with this photo?
We've got a few things starting to come in now. I'll give it a second, see if others want to add. So we got some comments about the pavement condition and the pit lid, the slippery pit lid in the path there. We've got the alignment of the bike lanes through the intersection, so it doesn't line up with anything. They have to cross diagonally, and they have to change sides of the road somehow there.
Yeah, all pretty good, very accurate. Yeah, this diagonal connection is very, very rare, not common at all, but there may be a very logical reason for this particular design choice. This is in Canada. I wasn't the one that snapped this photo. It was, I believe, your father that snapped this photo, Ken, and was kind enough to share it with us. But yeah, so I mean, there could be a valid reason to have this type of arrangement, but it's a little bit unusual. And also you can see this cyclist that's kind of heading in their own direction. It's a little bit intriguing as to how they got there and where their demands are and why aren't they being looked after within this particular facility. Anyway, there was no real one particular feature. I just wanted to give you a chance to get engaged and have a look at how different jurisdictions kind of do things, because it's a bit of a unique situation.
A few other good comments coming in there as well, but we can keep moving on, I think.
No worries. So one of the things that we look at signalized intersections, a thing called head starts, or the cyclist storing boxes at the start of the intersection lane. Really good idea, because what it does is it gives cyclists the primary position, so they're right in front of the vehicles. So there's no mistaking, that line of sight issue there when you're right in front and you're going to be slowing down general traffic. So in the Austroads guides, in that particular section, it'll give you a bit of a detail of when to actually apply these different arrangements. I'll start by saying example C is pretty useless. I don't think I've ever come across this one being used, fairly well or anything like that. Because what it's saying is you've got, a tiny little sliver here for through traffic movements, and then a little bit more for right turn. But how does a cyclist actually get to that right turn prior? So the ones that are most common are actually example D, where you've got the storage box that extends over the entire stand-up lanes. However, what's really important to consider is, do you want cyclists to travel or to perform movements in all of those directions? So if, for instance, you didn't want cyclists turning right at that intersection, could be onto a freeway, could be onto a high-speed road, could be onto a road that's just got no cycling facilities. You wouldn't want to be putting a bike box in front of that turn arrow, because it kind of communicates to cyclists that you can travel there, that's okay. So in that example, you might go for example B, where it's just saying cyclists can go through or you can turn left, but yeah, don't turn down the right yet, because we haven't really worked out what we want you to do there. So there is a bit of narrative and a bit of thinking about the different designs there. So if you are in that space, please do check out the Austroads guides there. The left turn and through treatments. This is, tricky if you don't have the availability, or, you don't have the capacity to do protected intersections. Then I'll just give you some examples of what kind of has been used. This left-hand one is using those sharrows that we talked about before, where it's basically the bike lane ends, and then on the left turn lane, as you're approaching the intersection, it's just you share that lane with general traffic. The right example is where the bike lane does continue all the way through or to the stand-up lane of the intersection, or the hold line of the intersection. It actually gets bent out though. And the reason for that is so you can travel through at that intersection. Both of these are, relatively common, I guess. Well, I would say the most common thing would be to do nothing, and these are better than nothing, but they're still not at the protected intersection level of what to do. And here's a real life example of an intersection. This is my ride to work. My ride to work is on the left-hand side of the screen, and home is on the right-hand side. And you can see if I was riding to work, I've got a on-road bicycle lane there that's right in the dooring zone, but I'm fairly confident these days, and that's not so bad. But as I approach the intersection, that's the sharrows there. So that's an example of what was shown on the previous slide. So approach the intersection and I'm just entering the left turn lane, but hopefully motorists can see that this is also a cyclist space, and we're sharing that area. On my way home from work, I have a similar arrangement where I'm riding right against the dooring zone again. I've got an on-road bicycle lane. You can see that's a bicycle symbol there, and then there's nothing. So then I'm forced to merge my way in front of traffic into that through lane, and then head through the intersection and into my bike lane again. So this one intersection shows two different design techniques. One is let's do some sharrows. The other one is let's do nothing. And there is a noticeable difference as you're a cyclist, just seeing those two different design interventions. So even though sharrows is not a protected intersection, it's still better than nothing. In a similar vein, these are really, really common near freeway entrances, or, big slip lanes or large arterial intersections. You just have long lengths of the bicycle lane that is kind of extending over a period where there could be a conflict with the vehicle. First intent would be just to, highlight that in green conflict paint, and not just where the conflict exists, which some may say is just kind of here and here. Just really extend that so it's obvious that this is a bicycle lane. Look out for cyclists within this space. You could look in a perfect world to be, building an off-road facility, get cyclists off and then crossing over the slip lane, preferably in a raised function so that they can, travel there. But haven't seen too many of those, to be honest. It's not a common way to treat these particular intersections, but if you were looking at high speeds and high traffic volumes, then you should be looking at off-road anyway. So we should be considering these types of interventions as well. Hook turns, really, really common in Victoria. I know other states do them as well. Really super useful for cyclists, because if you have multi-lane intersection and you were in the left-hand side as a cyclist and you're expected to cross over multiple lanes to get in the right-hand lane, and you've got to go in front of all those traffic, it's incredibly daunting. And even confident cyclists, unless there's a gap in traffic, they probably wouldn't be doing that. Instead, at the intersection, if you provide just these little storage areas right in front of the intersection and just say, this is a place where you can, travel here, prop and wait for the green light to go, and then you can travel on your merry way across like that. Really awesome technique, and we use them very liberally here in Victoria. So there's kind of lots and lots of intersections here. You can see them at each quadrant of the intersection as well, which will show you how that looks like out on the ground. And it's that similar narrative where if you don't want cyclists turning down a particular leg of this intersection, then you simply just wouldn't provide this particular feature. There's other designs that we have come across that actually move this over that side of the pedestrian crossing points. Wouldn't recommend that one as highly, purely because then you've just introduced a conflict point where pedestrians are crossing over here, and now you're somewhat encouraging cyclists to cross over in front of them. So yeah, this is more common to see it out closer to the carriageway, but still far enough away from the traffic lane. Just to there, is there an example of a bicycle hook turn and general traffic hook turn together? Yes, I can. If we've got time after this presentation, I can show you along Collins Street. I was thinking, Ken.
Yeah, I was just street viewing it. I'll dig it out.
Beautiful, yeah. But yeah, there are some like that. Is it similar to a bike box, but in front of the stop hold line? We'll see what Ken digs out there for us, but yeah, hopefully that will clarify that question. Here's another really awesome example, which is not used all that often. Here's something else we can do at signalized intersections, which is, so rather than get cyclists to come up in a right turn lane and turn from there, or yeah, pausing and waiting in this area near the carriageway, if we can bring them off road and provide some type of, push button facility. So they pause, they push the button, say, I'm a cyclist, I want to cross the road, and then all traffic stops and they can head across there. That's a pretty good outcome. I actually have a photo of this in Adelaide. I'll get rid of my drawings there so you can see that a little bit clearer. But you can see cyclists kind of bypass the intersection altogether. They're in a protected zone, they're away from the general through traffic, and there is a little push button there for them on that pedestal. And in this instance, they're actually taken across onto this side of the carriageway and then across that way from memory. But this is really good thinking, because it just saves the cyclist having to come across and trying to get into this lane in front of all those through traffic. It's a very uncomfortable experience. Ken?
Yeah, the Collins Street ones are not really cycle hook turns. I mean, you could hook turn if you wanted yourself as a cyclist, but they're not specifically. Sorry, just share my screen for a second here. So you've got your hook turns there, and there's a car waiting to hook turn. You're right. So I suppose the question is, are you as a bike rider meant to go around the back of that, or go in the front of that, or and store there? What's the deal?
I think if you turn to your right there, Ken, it might be easier to see that one that you're on. Yeah, because that is a great source of confusion, whether that symbol is meant for through cyclists or a hook turning cyclist.
Yeah. We don't know the answer.
I'm still trying to work it out. When we were cycling there, Ken, we were doing a bit of combination of the two, I was going to say.
Yeah. Well, I know I did a crash study of hook turns at one point, and there's just rife for motorcyclists getting struck traveling through and people hooking over them. And I would assume the same would apply for bikes. We were looking particularly at motorcyclists. And it's due to people not knowing the hook turn rules to wait till it's green there before they go. So it's clear there, and then and then the motorcyclists being smaller and hidden. So same principles apply. So I'd say behind would be safer, but yeah. Interesting one.
That is a good example. Excellent. Okie dokie. Go back to the slide. We'll have a look at this intersection here. Big one, very big intersection. You can see lots of traffic lanes. You can see there's some light rail or tram tracks in the middle here as well. So lots and lots going on. I'll show you how this looks like down on the ground. So this is a intersection in Melbourne, small little on-road, little head start box for cyclists. But most importantly is it's not activated at the moment, but there's adjacent the signal phase there, the signal lantern, sorry. There's another individual lantern, and that is just a circle with a B in it, or the bicycle symbol, sorry. And that is a head start for cyclists to enter this intersection. And that is an awesome win, particularly if you've got kind of left turning traffic, because that's where you get lots of conflict points at that left turn where motorists can't see cyclists. So if you can get cyclists heading through the intersection first, so then a left turning vehicle would know, okay, there's cyclists there, I need to wait and give way. That's a big win for cyclists. But the reason I wanted to use this particular example is because there is a little bit of what's the word, ambiguity in providing bicycle lanterns. And in this particular instance, when I was riding one day, I wanted to turn right and cross over in that fashion. And I saw the green bicycle lamp. So I thought, okay, this will be sweet. I can head straight across. So I wanted to do this movement. That's me in the southern area of this particular plan view. Wanted to head right across there, which is across, service road, 1, 2, 3, 4 traffic lanes, 2 tram lanes, and then into my bicycle lane all the way over there. So it's a fair distance. And because I saw the green bicycle lantern, I just assumed that that was applicable to all cyclist movements, but it wasn't. It was in fact meant to only accommodate for cyclists that were doing that through movement. So cyclists that wanted to head through, your chance to go and enter the intersection is now. A right turning cyclist weren't meant to be entering as they got that green. And as you can imagine, that's a little bit counterintuitive because you typically see the green and that means go. So, and what that actually meant is I kind of got it to this point at the intersection here when the rest of the traffic going through were also given the green. So, I mean, I was completely fine and I was at, traveling at pace. So I was very safe and I finished the movement, no problem. But there was an instance, a point in time where that through traffic movement perfectly, aligned with where I was turning, and there was that conflict zone. So there needs to be a little bit of thought about exactly how cyclists will interpret the bicycle lanterns, and do they know which direction of travel that they're now entitled to enter the intersection and complete their movements through. So yeah, it's just a little bit of food for thought in that particular instance. And yeah, as I said, no injuries or anything like that. So not any complaints, but here's one in Western Australia where they actually use the existing lantern face. They embed the cyclist lamp there as well. So it's all just part of the one face, which I think is a good idea. And you'll also notice that the cyclist have the amber and the red as well. So they can also gauge, or when do they need to, slam on the brakes, or when do they need to, when will they need to slow down to stop at this intersection, or will they make it through? Because it can be on 2 different times, because the speed of a motor vehicle can be different to the speed of a cyclist traveling through there. So they can be at 2 different intervals, which is another good thing to note. And that is the end of our session there, Ken, but I'll pause there for any questions.
Yeah, a few things. Well, a couple of comments. One associated with, I suppose, the lycra-clad cyclist, and whether are they going to turn from the left, with different facilities, or are they just going to go to the right? And I think that's, they're off bit of both.
Yep.
More, I don't think that's really a reason not to provide the facility, if that makes sense. Just the size of that intersection there that you were showing, the one you made the mistake on. And good point in there about potentially showing the arrow on the bike symbol in the lantern to really sort of clarify that. What's the typical time, seconds for bike head start? Do you know that off the top of your head?
I would say it's probably 3 to 5 seconds. It's not massive amounts of time there, Ken, that you'd get the head start. So the idea isn't that you complete your journey through the intersection. It's just that you are literally given the head start before vehicles.
Yep. No, that's it. All right. Good. We got some more 360 footage or something?
Yeah, I'll head through to the LMS now so we can run through the work for the end of the session. Did you want? Sorry, I should have brought that up. Oh, you had it. Yep. Yeah, it's all good. So today we've gone through intersection treatments, so module 3, and you'll see once again there is a 360-degree video for the intersections. You will see that protected Melbourne intersection that we were discussing in today's session. So you'll get to see exactly what that feels like riding through it, completing a right-hand turn. And apologies for the audio in that particular video. There was a helicopter going on overhead, and it's a really congested area. So just lots and lots of activity. Doesn't really pick up on the microphone too well, but hopefully you understand everything that's being said there. So you'll get to compare that intersection versus just a more conventional intersection where a hook turn is being completed. So if you've never seen a hook turn before, that's a good opportunity to see that. So we do encourage you to get onto that, perhaps after today's session. Module 3, we've got a quiz for today. So hopefully everyone was taking down notes. This will cover content from both the previous modules, so module 2 and module 3. So you may need to refer back to notes from last week in any of these questions, but encourage you to get onto that at the end of the day today as well. Our next session will be all on roundabouts. So there's lots of good content to cover there as well. And we'll talk about it in the next session, but there will be a separate assignment. So there will be no quiz next time. It will be an assignment for our last module, and that will involve a site inspection, as alluded to at the start of the webinar series. So that's all for the content for today. We might just leave everyone with a bit of time to do the quiz there, Ken, unless you wanted to wrap anything up.
No, I think we've done well there. And yeah, 5 minutes to do the quiz and make sure you're on track to finish off the course, complete everything. So thanks for the session, Max. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the wonderful chats behind the scene again. And we will see you on Thursday for our final session.
We'll see you then. Thanks very much. See you again.
Bye.